Welcome to Ladies Talking Love, episode 18, Modesty, Culture, and Sexuality. It's Ladies Talking Love, a community of women uncovering more joy and fulfillment in sex as we learn from experts and amazing women like you. Together, let's create a world where women's sexuality is celebrated and understood, beginning with our own. I'm your host, Ariel Finlinson. Let's talk love. I'm so excited to have Dr. Julie Hanks on this episode to talk about modesty culture. I know for me, growing up, this was something that was really hard for me. I felt a lot of shame around my body, that I needed to hide it, that I was responsible for boys' thoughts and feelings if I didn't dress appropriately. And I'm so grateful to have Dr. Hanks on to talk with us about some of her views around modesty culture and how we can maybe shift this culture to a healthier place in the way that we talk with our children about dress codes in our family or religious cultures, and also maybe shifting some of those views that we picked up when we were young that may not be helping us, especially with our sexuality and views of our body. Dr. Julie Hanks, PhD, LCSW, is a licensed clinical social worker and a psychotherapist with nearly 30 years' experience providing a safe place for healing conversations that educate and empower women to prioritize their dreams, revolutionize their families, and personalize their faith. She is an assistant professor of social work at Utah Valley University, the founder and director of Wasatch Family Therapy, an outpatient therapy clinic, and the author of The Burnout Cure and the Assertiveness Guide for Women. Dr. Hanks is a local and national media contributor, a private practice consultant, and an award-winning performing songwriter. Dr. Hanks is the host of Ask Dr. Julie Hanks podcast and creator of online courses helping women navigate motherhood, relationships, and faith. A native Californian, Hanks currently lives with her family in Sandy, Utah. Before we jump in, I just wanted to thank you again for being here. Thanks so much for being willing to learn with me and talk about these topics that can be kind of vulnerable and hard sometimes. As you listen to this or other episodes, I would really appreciate if you could share it with your friends or family or people that come to mind that may benefit from hearing it as well. And as always, I always love to learn with you on Instagram at ladies.talkinglove. But without further ado, let's talk love. I'm so excited to welcome Dr. Julie Hanks onto Ladies Talking Love. Thanks for joining me.
My pleasure.
So today we're going to kind of cover some topics around modesty. And I think a lot of us who grew up in conservative religions, there was some type of dress standards or things that were talked about around modesty, meaning about our dress. And could you kind of just start us off kind of what is modesty culture?
So modesty culture kind of goes along with purity culture, but it's controlling women through controlling what they wear, sexualizing women and making women responsible for men's thoughts and behaviors. So closely related to rape culture, right? So women, by how they dress, are responsible for men's thoughts and behaviors.
So what have you seen with your work, how this type of culture affects women's views of themselves and their sexuality?
Well, let's define also just modesty. The word modesty does not mean what women wear, right? It's like humility. It's not drawing undue attention to yourself. It has to do with appearance, but also with how you treat people, your behavior and your language. So in this modesty culture, it's defined really narrowly as what women wear, when that's actually not the definition of the word modest. So I want to clarify that.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I remember I was teaching a lesson to some of the young like 12 to 18-year-olds in my congregation. And I was trying to figure out how to broach this topic of modesty, because all growing up, it had only been about clothes. And as I studied, I was like, I just came upon that. I was like, this is it. That's the thing. It's not just our dress. It's our whole appearance and how we present ourselves And it's
Mm-hmm.
everything, the way we act, the way we dress, the way we
Mm-hmm.
talk.
And boys too.
And boys too. Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
It's not a gendered concept. And it's become this gendered concept and kind of rolled into patriarchy and controlling women's bodies.
And I'm so glad we clarified that, because that's something that I'm like, oh, if we could just enlarge that definition, I think that would do a lot of
Yes.
good to start off with.
Yes. Okay. So back to your question.
Yeah. So how does this affect women's views of themselves and especially of their sexuality?
So it can create shame about our bodies. So I've seen that a lot. It also can contribute to a hyper focus on appearance. It also creates a culture where judging what women wear is fair game, like openly being judgmental. So that impacts how we view ourselves if we feel like we're being judged wherever we go. So we're focused externally instead of on what do I want to express in how I present myself and how I treat people and the words that I use and all of that good stuff. So those are just some ways. It also can hinder healthy sexual development through that shame of like, my body is bad or scary or dangerous.
And I know I definitely felt that growing up in a
Mm.
culture where we talked a lot about modesty. It was like, if I dress in something that's revealing, I'm going to be causing bad thoughts or bad actions from these
Mm-hmm.
people. And it was my responsibility, instead of like, what I wear is my responsibility and what they think or do is theirs. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not
Yeah.
tied.
And I always go to, there are cultures where women are covered literally from head to toe, and they still have rape. It's not about what women wear, right? It's not about being provocative. It's about control. Sexual assault is about control. And yeah, we could go on and on about that. But again, everybody's responsible for their own behavior. You're responsible for your behavior and what you choose to express through how you present yourself.
Exactly. No, I think that is such a good point. And for those women, before we kind of jump into some of the more details, for women who are realizing like, wow, like I had some of these negative effects of modesty
Mm-hmm.
culture in my life, what are some things that you could tell them to help them start to overcome some of the shame that they may feel?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think first recognize the impact that it's had on you. So if you struggle with negative thoughts about your sexuality or about your body, recognize that it's not you. It's a cultural problem. It's not a you problem. So put it in the cultural context. It's not just a personal, there are lots of people going through this. So I think to recognize it, normalize it, put it in the culture. Those are some things that we can do. And then really take responsibility for your body, for what you dress, how you present yourself, that it's your business and it's your stewardship. It's not anybody else's. And so, really owning that can help with the confidence. And then I think seeing yourself as a sexual being, even if you're not being sexual right now, your sexuality is still part of you and it's good.
For me, as I kind of thought about this a lot for myself and for my kids or people I was interacting with, I kind of got to a place where I realized for me, it was like I had been trying to hide my body because there was shame
Mm-hmm.
and there was this view of like, I'm going to be hurting other people. And to get to a place where, okay, why am I wearing this? Am I wearing it to get attention? Am I wearing it to hide? And just kind of finding that middle ground for me of like, I am showing love to my body and I want to dress my body in a way I feel comfortable and I feel beautiful because I am beautiful and
Mm-hmm.
like all of us are beautiful and attractive. So dress your
Yeah.
body that way. But for me, it was kind of helpful to think about why am I dressing a certain way and then
Mm-hmm.
go out and not worry about it because
Mm-hmm.
here I am.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great example of taking ownership. Like, what do I want to feel and express through my body and through my appearance and through my actions and words?
As you've kind of worked with women who are working through some of the shame or the struggles of modesty culture, how have you seen that affect their sex lives as they've kind of worked through these harmful views of modesty culture?
Well, the biggest impact I've seen is kind of this denial of sexuality. And then when they're in a relationship where it's sanctioned to be sexual, so if they're like not having sex until they're married, or then it's like they freeze because it's been, denying of this part of themselves, denying of the physical part of themselves. And then all of a sudden it's okay. And they don't know how to all of a sudden overnight own it, And that's really hard. So it's also called the good girl syndrome. I think Laura Brotherson coined that term. She's an author and therapist. But like good girls don't have sex or don't enjoy sex or aren't sexual beings. So that's part of the damage, I think, of the modesty culture.
Is that we don't understand that we are sexual and we've hidden it for so long or not accepted it.
Right. We don't know how to bring it forward in our lives.
Yeah. And we can't do that overnight.
Right.
Right. On our wedding night or whenever.
Yeah.
Yes. So in some of our cultures that we have, there are religious standards or dress standards that we may want to help teach our children. What are some of your tips on how we can talk about these things with them and teach these things that might be important in our religious beliefs without causing shame or objectifying women?
Well, I think a huge thing is to talk about how dress codes apply to women and men. Another thing is to have it be a reflective process. What do you want to lead with? What do you want people to notice about you? Like, this is about you. And having it be, instead of how do you control people around you through your dress, like what's going on for you, like you mentioned. So I think those are two things. And I think it would be helpful to separate dress code from modesty. Modesty is so loaded. It doesn't mean what we, like the definition, like we talked about, isn't what you wear. That's just one little sliver of it. So I think saying a dress code, just like my daughter went to a private school during preschool and kindergarten, and they had to wear uniforms, certain uniforms. That was the expectation. It wasn't about being modest. It was like, this is the uniform for this school. This is what they've decided. So we need to go. It just wasn't a personal, like, don't show your, shoulders. It was just, okay, these are what's appropriate to wear. And that's it.
Yeah.
So it wasn't about covering your body. It was just, this is the expectation. And I think the dress codes need to be about what is appropriate for the activity. Is it an athletic activity? Okay, so then how do you dress for an athletic activity? How do you dress for a formal activity? And then in different cultures or subcultures, certain things send certain messages that they may not in other cultures. So in conservative religious cultures, showing your stomach or that may signal something. So we have to keep that in mind, right? Like, what are you signaling to your people? So it's not just like, oh, do whatever you want, but it's about what do you want to portray and then what's appropriate for the situation for men and women.
Which is so good. And in my head, I'm like, but it's so tied to the way I was taught as modesty. It's like, well, we cover that up. We cover that. It wasn't just like about the activities. Could you give us some concrete examples of situations, how we could kind of talk about this? Like, say that a child comes in and they're wearing something that according to your dress code isn't appropriate. How would you handle
my dress code or my religion's
your religion's dress code? Say, yeah, that's the thing. We're definitely going to talk about that too, because I want to know, like, right. How do you work maybe dress codes in your family versus? So let's say that they're the same at this point in this example. If it's a dress code of a religion and you are trying to uphold that in your house as well, how would you handle that situation?
So I would just say, hey, our family rule is one-piece swimming suits.
I love it.
That's it. Like, I wouldn't be like, you can't show your stomach. Oh my gosh. Because in doing that, in making it about the body parts, we're actually sexualizing women, which is the thing that dress codes are, or modesty, it supposedly is trying to address, right? Is to not have women be sexualized, but to be like, you have to cover your shoulders. We're sexualizing shoulders. So we're doing the thing that we're trying to not do, which is ironic.
That is such a good example. And in my head, I always am like, wait, but I feel like I have to say more, but you don't just say, this is our
expectation,
house
this
rules
is our
or
family
our
rule,
religious rules, whatever it is. And then no, I like that so much. And I'm like, going to have to think about this a lot more because wait, but I feel like I have to say why or like say, but this is it.
Yeah. If that's the expectation, then that's it. And you don't have to make it about anything religious. It's just like, this is the expectation.
And how this is a little more of a personal question, which I know that depending on people's family situations, they get to decide how they do it. But I would just love your take on how maybe you've decided in your religious values and views to kind of, if you have home dress code rules versus what your religious dress codes may be, how have you kind of navigated that with your kids?
I tend to be more, so I don't necessarily buy into the dress code that my religion teaches entirely. Like I get it, but what I do, so I currently have a teenage son and a teenage daughter. And I try to talk about modesty as a broader topic, right? What you lead with, how you present yourself. But particularly with my daughter, I will ask her, how do you feel wearing that? Tell me why you'd like that. To have her reflect on it. And then I let her make the decision.
I like that example a lot because I know for me, I thought about times when I've worn things that don't fit well. And the whole day I'm just thinking about myself, like, how to shift or how to do it. And I remember just having this realization that like, I think that is a big show for me about how I dress. Like I want to go out and be able to be present wherever I'm at. And if I'm thinking about what I'm wearing, whether that's hiding my body or trying to get attention for my body, I'm not present in what I want to do. And so for me, it's finding, just like thinking about how do I feel and finding a good place where I can just go out and be present.
And there are lines. So recently I just said, hey, you need to go change your shorts. And she's like, well, why? I'm like, because you pinned them. And when you pin shorts, they ride up more. Well, and she said, why are you looking at my behind? I said, it's looking at me. That's the problem. Go change. So there are lines too. And it's so personal for every family and every person. It's rare that it's the first time I've ever made her go change, but I'm like, for me, that's a line. Like if your cheeks are hanging out like shorts, I'm not okay with that personally. I just don't think that that's what I want my daughter to lead with. So.
And when you have these conversations, because you said you have a teenage daughter and son at home, and I know for me, when I was growing up and modesty, I'm having this in quotes, was taught, it was always about like, there were so many rules for me as a girl versus for my brothers. And I was like, how is this fair? And it just seemed with my family's rules of dress code, it was so much easier for them to find clothes that worked in the dress code. How do you kind of navigate that? Do you ever go into specifics around what clothes aren't appropriate or are appropriate? And especially when it's easier for guys than girls sometimes to find things.
I would talk more about what you're leading with. So if you're a guy and you're walking around without a shirt all the time and flexing, you're leading with your body. Is that what you want to be leading with? Maybe it is, So, but I think there are ways to apply the broader definition of modesty. What are you leading with? And are you calling undue attention to yourself? Are you being humble in your behavior? And kind of having that more holistic conversation, I think can be really valuable. And it applies to boys and girls because it's about what you're leading with. Are you trying to draw attention to yourself? Which is a self-centered thing, which if you're a follower of Christ is something that you don't, you try not to be. Yeah. So I don't know if I answered your question or.
No. I think that's so good. Cause in my mind, I'm still sometimes caught in these like old fashioned, like I have to talk about all the rules of like the hemlines, which I've seen on your page, which I love. It's like when we focus on those hemlines and we focus on, the cut, then we objectify and we kind of shame. And so I love that idea. And I know I have thought of it kind of in the same way you were talking about with how are you presenting yourself? And I've kind of thought like, what sign am I showing? What sign am I showing to people? And I really like that analogy. Just how are you presenting yourself? Do you want to lead with your body? Do you want to lead with your, whatever it is you decide, your
And
smile, your
sometimes
actions,
you do,
whatever.
like,
Yeah.
you know, and I think that that's okay. It's not, I wouldn't suggest to my child to always lead with your body, but I think it's okay to practice owning your sensuality too, So
Yeah.
I think it's just such a nuanced thing. I think you can't really just have blanket rules because every person is different. Every family is different and every culture is different.
And I really like how you've kind of talked about teaching it too, because I know a part of me is like, wait, Julie, give me more specifics.
I know. I'm
but that's
sorry.
like the beauty of it is that we get to let our children choose. And I think that's a really important thing as parents, that we get to teach and show how we may decide and model, but also they get to choose how they want to present themselves and how they want to go out into the world. And so I love how you didn't limit them with really specific things, even though like me, some of us might be like, wait a minute, what about this?
Yeah. A huge problem with this modesty culture and focusing on dress is that people feel free to judge what other people are wearing and their righteousness or their parents must be very permissive. And modesty or having a dress code or thinking about how you present yourself is for you to reflect on you, not for you to judge other people. And that's where I think so much of the damage is done, in using it to judge other people.
And how did you, from your own experience, so you have this religious dress code and then you have some different maybe lines in your home that you're like, you gave that example with the shorts of your daughter, like this is a line we don't cross. How did you come to that? Can you give us some tips on the processes as a parent to kind of look at both of your religious values, but also what you're going to decide in your home and make that work for you?
First, I think one of the things I like to help people do is personalize their faith. That we have to own our journey, and that includes owning and sifting and sorting through what we want to focus on and what we don't, because there are so many things we can't focus on everything at once, right? So for me, I grew up in Southern California at a time when modesty was not the focus that it has been. And I think social media may have made this modesty culture worse, because we can see that if someone's wearing a bikini on their trip to Mexico or Hawaii or wherever. So I wasn't uptight about it growing up. I'm old enough that it was just, I knew that how I dressed, like I wanted to dress in a way that was congruent with who I was. And so it wasn't a big deal until I had my own kids. And then it's like, oh, well, this is kind of being more of a focus. And I get why, because of the sexualization, and I get why it's focused more on women's clothing because of the sexualization of women. But the way that we've presented it and the way it's kind of evolved, like I said before, actually sexualizes certain body parts that aren't inherently or usually sexualized. So I think my background of not being so uptight about modesty has made it so I'm like, yeah. And I'm kind of, it's funny. I have like these two parts of myself that I'm a people pleaser and I'm also a rebel. So it's like, I want to fit in, but I also want to rebel.
I'm the same way. So I'm loving this. Yeah. I'm like, yep.
So I'm always fighting those two things. So anyway, that's a little bit about my personal experience.
So just kind of finding that balance that fits, and it
right.
And I think you just have to really think about it and figure out. And I know for me, sometimes I've tried things with my kids or said things and I'm like, I don't think that was the right thing. And so it's kind of error too.
Yeah. Yeah, the overarching message when you're talking about clothing and what you wear and all of that kind of stuff is that your body is good. Your body is good, your body is beautiful, sexuality is good, it's healthy, it's part of how you express yourself. And so measure what you're doing by that. Like, is this sending a message that their body is good or that they need to feel shame?
And how do you kind of handle, I don't know if this has happened with your kids, but maybe a lessons taught at church or someone outside of you and your spouse says something about what your kids are wearing? What are some tips to kind of handle those situations when maybe they're wearing
Yeah.
something that your parents or in-laws or whoever, or anyone, even friends, sometimes they'd be like, oh, why'd you let your kid wear that? And they might hear, how do you kind of handle those situations?
Yeah, I haven't had that come up. The lessons for sure have come up, and I would suggest just talking about it. Just talking about, like, so what do you think about that? So what do you think shoulders are, need to be covered? Why do you think that's being taught? What's the message behind it? What's the, like, just helping them reflect, I think, is a skill that we could all do better at. And then our job as parents is to help over time help kids get to the point where they're making all of their own decisions instead of us making them for them until they're 18 or 21 or whenever they leave the house.
I think it's so awesome to, yeah, just give them that ability to kind of start now. Like, here's
Mm-hmm.
some of the things we're going to talk about, but you get to make those choices as we're moving forward. And I know something that's been really frustrating for me with modesty culture is how it it's just this horrible cycle where women feel objectified and men also, I think, sometimes might get the impression that they can't control their sexuality. And I think it's just this horrible cycle as we like buy into women needing to cover up to protect men. And then men might be like, wait, I guess I can't really control myself because these girls around me are being taught that they have to cover up
Mm-hmm.
for me. What are some tips that we can kind of help to stop this cycle, maybe when we see it outside of our family or in our religious culture? Because even if we're
Mm-hmm.
teaching our kids, it doesn't always stop that there might be boys out there who are like, I don't feel like I can control myself and you decided to wear that.
Yeah. So I think teach your own kids about consent, that you are the boss of your body and no one can do anything without your agreement. It's okay to set boundaries when it comes to your body. So if someone else feels like they can't control themselves, like, that's their problem, not yours. And if you don't consent, then like, you're fine, walk away, give them permission to defend themselves if there's someone who believes that, right? I think when it comes up in sermons or lessons or things like that, to challenge it, to say, that sends a message that boys can't be responsible for their own thoughts and behaviors. And I believe in agency. So how can it be girls' responsibility when we all have agency?
I think it will be so helpful as we all just kind of start in this journey with our kids. I think it will really help shift. I've just been so frustrated sometimes looking at these cycles
Yeah.
and I'm like, what can we
Yeah.
do about it? So going back to women who have grown up with this can be a really hard shift to see their body as good and to accept their
Mhm.
sexuality. We kind of talked about that in the beginning. What are some things that they can really start to do if they're realizing that's me? Like, even though I've maybe been married or I've been in a sexual relationship for a while, I still really
Mhm.
struggle to see this as a good thing. What are some of your tips as we kind of shift this culture?
Read books. There's a great book called Come As You Are. There's some great sexuality books that help women understand themselves and claim their sexuality. So get book recommendations from friends or family. Kristen B. Hodson on Instagram is a great resource for sexual health. Get a therapist, work through some of that. A lot of women who have been raised in this culture feel like sex is for their male partner, and they don't own that it's there for them
Yes.
to have pleasure. So
Amen.
let's, so work toward that, like owning that this is for you too. It's a gift for you too.
As we talk about kind of going back to the dress standards or the dress code with our spouses or partners, what if they don't agree? And maybe we are kind of wanting to teach our kids in this way of like how you present yourselves, really looking into how you feel when you wear something. How can we kind of handle those situations where we might have a spouse or partner who is more conservative in their views of dress codes? Like,
it's funny because
how do
I
we
have
handle
that.
it? Okay, tell us the magic.
So in general, and it just so happens that we have 2 girls and 2 boys. I've kind of let him be more particular about what the boys wear. So in our religious culture, wearing a white shirt to church is a big deal. And I don't care, but it's a big deal for him. I'm like, then you deal with what is important to you with our boys, and I'm going to do our girl. I just don't think that dads commenting on what girls wear is helpful. So that's kind of how we've worked it out.
No, that's awesome. Because
Especially critical,
yes.
right?
Yes, I think that is not very helpful. So were there some waves with that, or was he pretty?
Yeah, there still are. Like, I think there's some tension in our relationship about it, for sure.
How do you handle that when that comes up?
Just we agree to disagree. We tolerate the tension. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not something that's going to resolve, because we're coming from a different place, and he sees it from a male perspective and I see it from a female perspective. And so that's okay.
No, I
you don't have
love
to
that.
resolve everything.
Thank you so much for sharing that, though, because I think some of us, it can be hard to realize that no, it's okay to have these disagreements, but find a balance, and you've agreed on that. So,
And there's no right way to do it.
And it's okay if there's still tension, because
Yeah.
there's some things that
Yeah.
we will never agree on with our spouse.
Right. He's like, oh, I wish you'd handle that differently. I'm like, yeah. Oh, well. Yep.
Yes. No, I love that. As we kind of close up, I would just love if you could give us a couple tips. We've done a lot, but if you were going to give some women maybe your top 2 or 3 tips to start to kind of work through the effects of modesty culture and teaching their kids, what would you say to them?
So I would say create your own expectations. So take whatever, if you're in a conservative religious culture, take what works for you from that, but own your own philosophy, right? Like, that's your stewardship as a parent. Then in helping your kids decide how to present themselves, help them develop reflective skills. How do you want to present yourself? How do you feel in this? What do you want to portray? Help them develop that reflection, and then never judge another person. And if you catch yourself judging oh, well, that skirt's kind of short or what, then catch yourself and just turn the mirror to you and recognize how immodest, right? How not humble that is to judge somebody else.
Thank you so much for that. I was going to ask you more details on how to do that so I'm glad you said, because I think that can be really challenging when maybe we have our own beliefs that we've decided the way we dress and you see someone else, it can be really easy. So I love that, to turn and say, okay, what am I thinking about them? Is that being modest in my thoughts?
Right. And if you're a Christian, you can look at the story where Jesus told the man to pluck his eye out. He didn't tell the woman to cover up. Like the man who was lusting, he said, pluck your eye out. He didn't say, woman, cover up. And also, Jesus didn't talk a lot about clothing. He talked a lot about not judging.
Mm-hmm.
And so that I try to teach my kids, that's if there's a greater sin, that's the greater sin. Like, you're in the wrong if you're judging somebody else's appearance.
And I love too, a lot of Jesus's work, I think, was introspective too. Like, how do you feel? How can you reach out? How can you serve? And I know for me, when I'm dressed in a way where I'm focused on myself, I'm not as able to reach out and serve and see what other people need. So I love all those examples. Thank you so much for joining me today, Dr.
Oh,
Hanks.
my
This has been
pleasure.
awesome. Can you tell us where we can find you and some of your resources?
So Ask Dr. Julie Hanks podcast. You can search that wherever you get your podcasts, at Dr. Julie Hanks on social media, particularly Instagram, and drjuliehanks.com.
Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you.
I don't know if you felt anything like me, but I kept thinking, Dr. Hanks, just tell me what to do throughout this interview. But it was so good for me to realize even more that really no one can tell us exactly how we should handle these things with our family or with our kids or ourselves, because it really is a personal journey. And I love hearing other people's opinions and thoughts, but in the end, it's for us to kind of define how we feel in our faith and personalize our faith, as Dr. Hanks said, and then to decide what that's going to look like in our homes and families. One of my big takeaways, I just loved thinking about how we present ourselves and really helping our kids think about that versus specific hemlines or rules around clothing, and for myself as well. How do I want to present myself going into public? This episode definitely opened up some good conversations for me and my husband, and I hope that the same is true in your family. Thanks for talking love. Join the conversation at ladies.talkinglove on Instagram and tag your friends who would like to participate. You can also check out our website, ladiestalkinglove.com, where you can access each episode and join our exclusive newsletter. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Instagram or by email to hello@ladiestalkinglove.com as we learn together. Thanks for talking love.